عفرة جاية علينا عاملة ازاي؟
Recently, frightening scenes began to unfold in Jerusalem as the sky suddenly darkened, swallowed by huge black clouds, while fierce winds howled through the streets. Trees snapped, loose objects were blown across the roads, and rooftops began to shake as the storm quickly built strength. Within a narrow window of time, nature seemed to erupt in anger as heavy rain started pouring down, turning streets slippery and chaotic. In several areas, the strong winds damaged homes and shops, leaving many people shaken and some families without shelter. Many witnesses said they had never seen the sky over Jerusalem look so threatening. So, what exactly happened in Jerusalem that day? Was it simply a powerful storm? Or something that made people around the world start paying attention? If you want to follow the full story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. At first, many people thought it was just another storm forming over Jerusalem. Dark clouds gathering above the hills around the city were nothing new. Weather in this region can change quickly, and strong winds often arrive without much warning. But within a few minutes, people started to feel that this sky was different. The change happened fast. Across the city, the bright afternoon light slowly began to fade as large clouds moved in from the west. At first they looked like small patches of shadow drifting across the sky. But soon, the clouds grew bigger, thicker, and started spreading much faster. Within minutes, they covered most of the sky like a huge dark curtain. The sunlight that had filled the narrow streets just moments earlier began to disappear. The sky turned from light blue to a deep gray. The stone buildings, rooftops, and old city walls fell under a strange dim light that made everything feel a little unsettling. People began looking up. Some stopped in the middle of the street, staring at the sky, trying to understand what was going on. Others pointed toward the thick wall of clouds, moving closer. "It's getting dark way too fast," someone said in a video that later spread across social media. And they were right. The darkness didn't come slowly like a normal storm. It felt sudden, almost too quick, as if the sky had changed in only a few minutes. Then the wind arrived. At first, it was just a light breeze moving through the streets, but the air soon became stronger and more restless. Wind pushed through the narrow roads between the stone buildings, shaking signs and tree branches. Leaves lifted from the ground and spun through the air. Market tents began flapping hard. Papers scattered across the sidewalks. It was the kind of moment when people start to feel that something bigger might be coming. Across different parts of the city, daily life changed almost instantly. Many residents said they felt a strange sense of worry at that moment, a quiet feeling that this storm might be stronger than usual. Weather experts later explained that sudden changes like this can happen when large weather systems move across the eastern Mediterranean. Big differences in air pressure between the hot desert air and cooler air coming from the sea can quickly create powerful storms. But scientists also mentioned another possible factor. In recent days, missile interceptions, explosions, and heavy military activity can release heat, smoke, and tiny particles into the air. In some cases, these things can interact with weather systems already forming in the atmosphere. They don't create storms by themselves, but they can sometimes make weather patterns less stable, especially in a region already known for sudden desert winds and fast-moving storms. Still, events like this are difficult to measure, so confirming the exact cause is not easy. By now, the wind was roaring through the streets. Trees bent as strong gusts pushed against them. Power lines hummed softly as the wind rushed past. And above it all, the sky over the ancient city carried a strange feeling, something that didn't seem to fully match either normal weather or the tensions of war. For some people watching the sky, one thought came to mind almost immediately. What if this wasn't just another storm, but the beginning of something new and uncertain unfolding over Jerusalem? Just as the sky over the city grew darker and the wind continued to build, something unusual began to appear within the storm clouds. At first, it was only a brief flash of light, something many people assumed was ordinary lightning forming inside the thickening clouds. Storms often bring sudden flashes across the sky, and most residents barely paid attention at first. But this light did not behave like normal lightning. Instead of striking down in a sharp, blinding line, the light seemed to gather itself into a glowing shape, a small sphere of bright energy suspended within the clouds above the city. For a moment, it hovered. Several witnesses later said they thought their eyes were playing tricks on them. The glowing object appeared as a round ball of light, moving slowly across the sky, drifting through the dark storm clouds like a floating lantern. It was not the quick flash of lightning people were used to seeing during a storm. This light remained visible for several seconds, glowing with an intense white color with hints of orange that stood out sharply against the heavy gray sky. In several videos captured that evening, a glowing sphere could be seen moving silently through the clouds, flickering softly before fading, and then appearing again moments later. But something else was happening in the sky at the same time. Across the horizon above Jerusalem, distant flashes suddenly began appearing, thin streaks of light rising rapidly into the air. Interceptor missiles, launched from defense systems, streaked upward, while incoming rockets from neighboring regions crossed the sky in the opposite direction. Within seconds, the sky became a chaotic display of motion. The lightning appeared almost intertwined with the streaks of rockets. Brilliant white flashes erupted between the missile trails, illuminating the clouds for brief moments. Each burst revealed a sky filled with crossing lines of light, natural lightning, and human-made fire sharing the same horizon. For those watching from rooftops and balconies, the scene looked surreal. The glowing sphere drifted silently through the clouds, while lightning flashed violently nearby and missile trails burned across the sky. For a few seconds, the entire atmosphere above Jerusalem looked like a single massive canvas, a collision of storm, technology, and tension. Scenes like this quickly began spreading online as witnesses uploaded their recordings. Within hours, the mysterious lights and the strange sky above Jerusalem became one of the most discussed moments of the night. For many observers, the sky itself seemed to mirror the tension on the ground. Natural forces and human conflict appearing together in the same moment, as if the entire horizon was painting a scene that the world was still struggling to resolve. Some who watched quietly remembered a passage from the Bible often quoted when speaking about lightning and storms. For his lightning lights up the world. The earth sees it and trembles. Psalm 97:4. Above Jerusalem, the storm clouds continued to churn as the wind grew stronger. The glowing lights eventually disappeared, but the feeling they left behind remained. Many witnesses later said that was the moment they realized something unusual was unfolding. The storm that had begun with dark clouds and rising wind had now become something far more complex, and the sky above Jerusalem was only beginning to reveal its power. The strange lights in the sky had barely disappeared when the storm over Jerusalem finally showed its full power. What started as dark clouds and rising wind quickly turned into something much more dangerous. The air felt heavy, and the wind that had been moving lightly through the streets suddenly became strong and aggressive. Within minutes, powerful gusts rushed through neighborhoods across the city, shaking windows and rattling rooftops as if the storm had suddenly come alive. The wind kept getting stronger. Trees that had been standing still only minutes earlier began to bend under the pressure. Their branches whipped wildly through the air as strong gusts swept across streets and neighborhoods. Some trees could not handle the force. Large branches began snapping with sharp cracking sounds, falling onto roads and parked cars below. In some places, entire trees were pulled from the ground as the storm pushed forward without slowing down. Then, the rain arrived. At first, it came as a few scattered drops blowing sideways in the wind, but within seconds, the sky fully opened. Heavy rain poured down hard, hitting rooftops, streets, and open areas with non-stop force. Water quickly began running along the roads as drains struggled to keep up. Small puddles turned into streams, moving along sidewalks and through narrow streets. It suddenly became much harder to see. Drivers slowed down as rain slammed against their windshields. People walking outside rushed to stand under doorways and balconies, trying to escape the sudden downpour. Thunder echoed across the dark sky, while lightning flashed deep inside the storm clouds. The strong winds also reached the hills surrounding Jerusalem. Gusts pushed across open land and valleys, stirring dust and debris into the air. In some places, loose signs, chairs, and small objects were blown across courtyards and streets. Back inside the city, the damage slowly began to grow. In markets and small shops, owners tried to hold doors closed as the wind pushed against them. Outdoor stands were knocked over, as rain soaked everything in seconds. Pieces of broken branches and debris scattered across roads and sidewalks. Even animals reacted to the sudden change. Cats and stray dogs ran for cover under parked cars and building entrances. Birds struggled to fly through the heavy wind, some landing quickly on rooftops to escape the storm. Everywhere, the sound of the storm filled the air. Wind roared through the streets. Rain hammered against stone walls and metal rooftops. Tree branches cracked in the darkness as the storm continued to grow stronger. For many residents, it felt like the entire city was shaking under the force of nature. Some people watching the storm unfold remembered words written long ago in the Bible about moments when nature itself seemed to rise with overwhelming power. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. Psalm 29:3. Above Jerusalem, the storm clouds continued to move and grow, pushed forward by powerful winds. What had begun as dark clouds and rising wind had now become a full and violent storm, moving across the city. And for many watching that night, it felt like this was only the beginning. As the storm kept hitting Jerusalem, heavy rain continued falling for hours. The streets slowly began filling with water, as the drainage systems struggled to keep up. What first looked like normal flooding soon started spreading into neighborhoods, covering roads, cars, and sidewalks with muddy water rushing through the city. In some areas, the water rose faster than people expected. At first, it only covered parts of the street. But soon the water began moving into homes and shops on lower levels. Doors were pushed open by the pressure of the water, and small windows cracked as the flood forced its way inside buildings. Before long, the situation became frightening. In several neighborhoods with lower ground levels, water climbed past doorways and started reaching windows. Families inside their homes had to move quickly upstairs to stay safe. Some people went from the first floor to the upper rooms, and in a few cases even climbed onto rooftops as the water continued rising below them. From above, the view looked alarming. Streets had turned into wide streams of muddy water. Cars were half covered, and only the tops of some vehicles could still be seen. People stood on balconies and rooftops, waving their arms and calling for help, hoping someone nearby would notice them. Some parents held their children close as they waited. Others stood carefully along railings or narrow roof edges, trying to stay above the water that surrounded them. Fear spread quickly as the strong current carried debris through the streets that now looked more like rivers. Cars slowly drifted away like abandoned objects. Trash bins, broken branches, wooden boards, and pieces of fences floated through the rushing water as the flood pushed through parts of the city. Soon, emergency sirens began echoing through the rain. Rescue teams started moving toward the flooded areas as reports spread across Jerusalem. Police, firefighters, and emergency workers arrived with trucks, ropes, and rescue equipment. Some teams used small boats to reach people trapped by the rising water. But helping everyone was not easy. The water moved quickly through narrow streets. In some places, the current was strong enough to push against rescue vehicles. The muddy water also hid dangerous obstacles under the surface, including fallen branches, damaged signs, and broken pieces of buildings. Some rescuers threw ropes toward people waiting on balconies or rooftops. Others carefully moved boats between buildings, helping families climb in one by one. In several tense moments, people were pulled from rooftops and lifted into rescue boats while the water continued rushing around them. In a few areas, however, the water was still too strong. Rescue teams had to wait for safer conditions before moving closer. Through loudspeakers, emergency workers told residents to stay on higher floors or rooftops until help could safely reach them. Above the city, helicopters soon appeared in the dark sky. Their blades roared through the storm as crews searched for people trapped by the rising water. In some rescues, ropes were lowered from the aircraft while people were lifted to safety one by one. Yet even as help arrived, the rain continued falling. Dark storm clouds still hung over Jerusalem, feeding the water that had already spread through parts of the city. With every passing hour, new reports came in about flooded streets and people needing assistance. For many watching the situation unfold, the scene reminded them of words written long ago in the Bible. "The floods have risen, Lord, the floods have lifted their voice. The floods lift up their waves." Psalm 93:3. Across Jerusalem, water continued moving through streets and neighborhoods, carrying debris and forcing families to wait for rescue. And with the storm clouds still gathering above the city, many feared that the worst might not be over yet. Even as heavy rain and flooding continued in parts of Jerusalem, another frightening part of the storm began to appear. High above the dark clouds covering the city, the atmosphere was becoming more unstable. Cold air moving through the upper sky crashed into rising warm air below, creating huge thunderclouds that twisted and rolled like giant towers overhead. What fell from those clouds next surprised many people. At first, only a few small pieces of ice hit the ground. They bounced lightly off rooftops and streets, catching people off guard. Many residents were already watching the storm carefully, but these first pieces of ice didn't seem too serious. Then, the sound suddenly changed. The sky began dropping something much stronger. Large hailstones started falling from the clouds. They slammed into rooftops, cars, and streets with sharp cracking sounds. What started as a few scattered pieces of ice quickly turned into a heavy hailstorm, as dozens, then hundreds of frozen stones fell across neighborhoods and streets. The noise quickly became loud and chaotic. Hail pounded against metal roofs like rocks being thrown from the sky. Windows shook as ice hit the glass. People who were still outside immediately ran for cover as the storm kept getting stronger. Some hailstones were about the size of golf balls. Others looked even bigger. When they hit the ground, they broke apart and scattered pieces of ice across the sidewalks and roads. Cars parked along the streets quickly started showing damage. Windshields cracked under the hits, and dents appeared on hoods and roofs as the ice kept falling. In some areas, the hail came down so heavily that the streets started turning white. Drivers who had been trying to move through the storm suddenly slowed down or stopped completely. Visibility dropped, and the roads became slippery and dangerous. Many people pulled their cars to the side and waited inside, hoping the hailstorm would end before their vehicles were badly damaged. Across neighborhoods, the sound of hail hitting rooftops echoed through the storm. Roof tiles cracked after repeated impacts. Metal roofing rattled loudly as the ice struck again and again. In a few homes, small glass skylights broke, letting rain and ice fall into the rooms below. People rushed indoors as fast as they could. Pedestrians ran from sidewalks into shops, restaurants, and apartment buildings, raising their arms over their heads to protect themselves from the falling ice. Some tried using umbrellas or bags as shields, but the hailstones were too large and too strong to stop easily. Parents shouted for their children to come inside right away. Street vendors quickly left their stands as the ice began hitting their carts and tables. Within minutes, outdoor markets that had been busy just moments earlier were suddenly empty as people ran for shelter. Even animals reacted to the sudden violence of the storm. Birds flew away from rooftops, searching for cover under bridges and building edges. Stray cats and dogs ran toward doorways as residents quickly opened doors to let them inside. Above all the chaos, thunder kept rolling across the sky. Lightning flashed inside the massive storm clouds, lighting up the falling hail for a few seconds at a time. For some people watching the storm, The scene brought to mind ancient words written about powerful storms. He loads the thick cloud with moisture. The clouds scatter his lightning. Job 37:11. Above Jerusalem, the storm continued to grow stronger. Rain, wind, hail, and thunder were now moving together in one powerful system, shaking the city. What had begun as dark clouds earlier in the day had turned into a full display of nature's force. And even as the hail kept falling, many people could feel that the storm was not finished yet. If you are still watching, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. As the storm over Jerusalem kept getting stronger, the sky above the city started looking even more unstable. Dark clouds rolled and twisted across the sky like giant waves. Thunder echoed across the hills while rain and hail continued hitting rooftops and streets below. Many people watching the sky felt like the storm had already reached its worst point. But what appeared next shocked even those who had already seen how powerful the storm had become. Inside the thick storm clouds, something strange began to happen. High above the ground, part of the cloud slowly started spinning. At first it was hard to see clearly through the heavy rain and darkness, but after a few moments, the movement became easier to notice. The center of the cloud began pulling downward, stretching toward the ground like the storm itself was reaching down. Then it happened. A long, funnel-shaped column of spinning wind dropped from the cloud. The dark, twisting shape reached down from the sky, like a rope made of wind. Slowly at first, then faster, the funnel stretched lower and lower until it finally touched the ground. A tornado had formed. The moment the spinning column connected with the earth, the wind grew much stronger. Dust and debris were quickly pulled into the air. Leaves, dirt, and broken branches began spinning around the funnel as it gained strength. Within seconds, damage started appearing. The tornado moved across open areas and roads, tearing through anything in its path. Trees that had already been weakened by the storm suddenly snapped as the powerful wind twisted through their branches. Some trees were even pulled out of the ground, their roots lifted into the air before being thrown aside. Nearby rooftops began shaking violently as the wind passed. In several places, pieces of metal roofing were ripped off and thrown through the air like paper. Wooden fences broke apart as the tornado crossed open land, scattering boards and debris across the ground. Small structures like sheds were destroyed in seconds. The sound of the tornado was terrifying. Many witnesses later said it sounded like a loud jet engine or a fast-moving train roaring through the air. The wind screamed as it spun faster and faster, pulling everything into its path. People who saw the funnel coming quickly ran for safety. Some rushed into buildings, while others moved to lower floors or rooms without windows. Anyone caught outside could only watch in shock as the spinning column of wind moved across the land. Above the chaos, lightning kept flashing inside the dark storm clouds, lighting up the tornado for a few seconds at a time. For some people, the frightening scene reminded them of words written long ago in the Bible. The Lord has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm. Nahum 1-3. The tornado continued moving across the area, lifting debris high into the sky, while thunder and rain surrounded it. Trees, broken branches, and pieces of rooftops spun through the air as the storm showed one of its most violent moments. And as the dark funnel moved beneath the stormy sky over Jerusalem, many people realized the storm had reached a level of destruction they had never expected. As the storm kept moving across Jerusalem, many people thought they had already seen the worst of it. Heavy rain had flooded some streets, strong winds had shaken buildings, and hail had already caused damage in several areas. But high above the city, in the colder hills around Jerusalem, the storm showed another surprising change that few people expected. While the lower parts of the city were still dealing with rain and flooding, the air in the higher areas started getting colder. The powerful storm system carried a huge amount of moisture, and as the clouds moved over higher ground where the temperature was lower, the weather began to shift. The rain slowly started to change. What began falling from the sky, there was no longer just rain. It was snow. At first, only a few small flakes appeared. They floated slowly through the wind, looking like tiny white sparks against the dark sky. People in the higher neighborhoods looked outside in surprise as the temperature suddenly dropped and the rain turned into light snow. But the snowfall did not stay gentle for long. Within minutes, the wind grew stronger again, pushing the snow across the air with force. What started as a few scattered flakes quickly turned into a heavy snowstorm as thick clouds released waves of snow over the hills, roads, and neighborhoods. Visibility dropped quickly. The wind blew snow sideways across the streets, covering roads, rooftops, and trees with layers of white. Drivers moving through the hill roads had to slow down or stop as the path ahead slowly disappeared behind blowing snow. The scene felt almost unreal. In some parts of the city, people were still dealing with heavy rain and standing water, while in the higher areas, the same storm was covering the ground with snow and ice. It felt like the weather had suddenly lost balance. Residents in those colder areas quickly prepared for the sudden snowfall. Doors and windows were closed tightly as cold wind pushed against the buildings. People put on thicker jackets and watched as the ground outside slowly turned white. Snow started building up on rooftops and along narrow roads. Tree branches bent under the growing weight while the wind howled through the hills, sending waves of snow spinning through the air like white clouds. Some drivers who had been traveling through those areas suddenly found themselves stuck as the roads became slippery and dangerous. Cars pulled over to the side as drivers waited, hoping the storm would calm down before the snow blocked the road completely. The strange difference in weather left many people shocked. In one part of the city, rain and floodwater were still causing problems. In another area, the same storm was freezing the land under falling snow. It almost felt like the elements themselves were fighting each other. Thunder continued rumbling through the sky as lightning flashed above the clouds, lighting up the blowing snow for a few seconds at a time. For some people watching the storm, the scene reminded them of words written long ago in the Bible. He says to the snow, "Fall on the earth," and to the rain, "Be a mighty downpour." Job 37:6. The storm over Jerusalem kept moving, bringing rain, wind, hail, flooding, and now even snow to different parts of the region. What started earlier as dark clouds and rising wind had now turned into something far more unpredictable. And as people watched the strange weather unfold, many felt the same thought crossing their minds. It seemed like nature itself had completely lost control. Just when it seemed the storm had already caused enough damage in Jerusalem, another frightening moment arrived that no one expected. Across the city, people were still trying to deal with everything the storm had left behind. Emergency teams were moving through wet streets, residents were clearing branches and debris, and families stood outside their homes, hoping the worst was finally over. But under the soaked ground and shaken city, another force was building. Then suddenly, the ground moved. At first it was very light, almost like a small vibration passing through the earth. Some people inside their homes felt a slight shake under their feet. It was the kind of feeling that makes you stop for a moment and wonder if something just shifted. But within seconds, the shaking became stronger. Walls began to tremble. Windows rattled loudly inside buildings. Chairs and tables moved slightly across the floor as the ground continued shaking under entire neighborhoods. What started as a small tremor quickly turned into something much more serious. An earthquake had begun. Across Jerusalem, people felt the ground suddenly moving beneath them. Buildings creaked as the structures reacted to the motion. Hanging lights swung back and forth, and objects on shelves started falling to the floor. Fear spread quickly. Families rushed toward doors and stairways, trying to get outside as fast as possible. Some people shouted warnings to neighbors, while others grabbed their children and ran into open streets. Outside, the shaking felt even more frightening. Cars parked along the roads rocked slightly as the ground moved under them. Power lines swayed above the streets, and a deep rumbling sound could be heard in the distance. In some places, small cracks appeared in walls and pavement as the shaking continued. People stood frozen in shock, watching the ground beneath their feet. Many residents had already spent hours dealing with dangerous weather. Strong winds had shaken buildings, hail had damaged cars and homes, and heavy rain had flooded parts of the city. Now even the earth itself seemed to join the chaos. Some people dropped to their knees in fear. Others raised their voices in prayer as the shaking continued. In moments like this, many remembered words written long ago in the Bible. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. Psalm 18:7. The shaking lasted only a short time, but for the people experiencing it, those seconds felt much longer. Slowly, the movement began to stop. Buildings stopped rattling. Power lines became steady again. The ground slowly returned to calm. But the fear did not disappear. Residents stood quietly in the streets, looking back at their homes and buildings, unsure of what damage might have happened. Some checked on family members and neighbors to make sure everyone was safe. Others simply looked up at the sky, still dark with storm clouds, trying to understand everything that had just taken place. In just one day, Jerusalem had faced powerful storms, heavy rain, hail, strong winds, sudden snow in the hills, and now an earthquake. For many people who witnessed it, it felt like the peak of a long chain of disasters. Nature had shown nearly all of its power, and standing there among wet streets and shaken buildings, many residents realized they had just lived through one of the most intense and frightening days they could remember.
شيء هائل يا جماعة. لا
Moments like this are not unusual simply because they never happen. What made it striking was when it happened. In a narrow window of time, the sky above Jerusalem changes, and suddenly the world begins paying attention. The air grew heavy. The crowd slowed near the Western Wall. For a brief moment, thousands stood in silence, watching something they couldn't fully explain. It wasn't only the event itself that caught attention, but the timing, arriving after a series of tense moments that had already unsettled the atmosphere in the city. Within hours, stories began spreading far beyond Jerusalem, leaving people everywhere asking the same question. Could this be connected to something foretold long ago? In this video, we'll walk through the events step by step and explore this particular moment through the light of faith in Scripture. For centuries, Jerusalem has stood as one of the most sacred places on earth, a city of prayer, history, and quiet devotion. Within its ancient walls, the Western Wall Plaza remains a place where thousands gather each day, pressing their hands against the stones, whispering prayers carried through generations. People come expecting stillness, reflection, continuity. But on one evening, something changed. At first, it was movement in the air, not a few insects drifting near the lamps, not a small cluster drawn to the light. This was different. The sky above the plaza seemed to ripple with motion. Dark shapes began circling the bright lights that illuminate the stone courtyard beneath the towering walls of the Temple Mount. Within minutes, it became impossible to ignore. There were locusts, and there were many of them. They swarmed around the floodlights above the Western Wall, filling the night air with restless movement. Some descended onto the pale stone pavement. Others clung briefly to the ancient blocks of the wall itself before lifting again into the air. Their motion formed thick waves circling the lights, shifting constantly as if the sky itself had begun to move. At first, the sound was faint. A soft flutter carried through the night, but as their numbers grew, the air began to hum with the rhythm of wings. Worshippers slowed their steps. The usual quiet flow of people moving toward the wall did not stop, but it changed. Heads tilted upward. Eyes followed the swirling shapes above the plaza. Some stepped aside, watching closely. Others continued their prayers, glancing upward between whispered words. No announcement was made. No warning was given. Yet the sight was undeniable. The swarm moved as a single living mass, sweeping across the lights in thick spirals. From certain angles, it looked almost like smoke rising against the dark sky above Jerusalem's old stones. From others, it formed dense clouds that briefly dimmed the lights before scattering again into shifting patterns. Someone began recording, then another. Within minutes, phones were lifted across the plaza. Wide shots captured the insects filling the air above the western wall. Close-up videos showed locusts landing on the stone ground. Slow-motion clips revealed the swarm moving in heavy waves around the lights. What made the moment powerful was not chaos. It was contrast. As the ancient stones of the western wall stood unmoved, silent as they have for centuries, while the air above them churned with restless motion. Worshippers continued their prayers beneath a shifting cloud of wings. The sacred and the sudden existed together in the same frame. Soon the videos began spreading online. Viewers replayed the footage again and again, trying to understand the scale of what they were seeing. Some zoomed in, pointing out how dense the swarm appeared around the lights. Comments filled with questions. Had this happened before? Was this common? Why did it seem so intense? For some, the images quietly echoed ancient words recorded long ago. They covered the face of the whole land so that the land was darkened. Exodus at 10:15. The footage did not show panic. It showed attention. Even those who continued walking seemed more aware of the moment. The usual movement across the plaza felt slower, as if people sensed that this was not an ordinary sight. Children pointed toward the sky. Adults watched silently. Workers crossing the plaza stepped carefully around insects gathered on the ground. Under the bright lights, the swarm looked almost surreal. The locusts circled endlessly around the illumination, forming dense loops that sometimes thickened enough to dim the glow before breaking apart again. Their presence was impossible to overlook. From nearly every corner of the plaza, the movement could be seen. And yet, the wall remained still. That stillness made the motion above it feel even more striking. From above, the scene would have appeared extraordinary. The ancient stones at the center, worshippers gathered below, and above them a dark, shifting cloud in constant motion beneath the night sky of Jerusalem. No one seemed certain how long it would last. No one was ready to say what it meant. It was simply happening. Some people captured the moment quietly. Others watched without speaking. A few appeared thoughtful, everyone as if weighing what they saw against everything they expected this place to be. There was no single reaction, only the awareness that something unusual was unfolding in plain sight. The swarm had not arrived slowly over hours. It appeared suddenly, thick, visible, undeniable. And because of where it appeared, the moment carried weight beyond its size. Insects in the night sky are ordinary, but locusts filling the air above the western wall in Jerusalem feel different. The evening that began with quiet prayer now carried another layer of attention. Not fear, not chaos, but a sharpened awareness created by contrast. The sacred stones remained unchanged, but the air above them told another story. And as the videos continued to circulate far beyond Jerusalem, one thought quietly repeated across countless screens. This was not something people were used to seeing. What came after this surprised even more people. So stay with us. Wait, and leave a like if you're ready to see the next part. At first, many believed it was simply nature. The first drops of rain were barely noticeable. In Jerusalem, rain is not unheard of, but during certain seasons, the sky often remains calm and clear above the ancient stone city. That evening, when the first light droplets touched the stones near the western wall, many worshippers simply paused and looked upward with mild surprise. A few smiled. Others lifted their hands, feeling the cool water against the warm evening air. At first it felt refreshing, brief, harmless, but the rain did not stop. It grew heavier. Dark clouds began gathering above the old city, thick and fast, rolling over the hills that were surround Jerusalem. The sky dimmed as the clouds pressed together, bringing with them a weight that felt unusual for such a peaceful evening. Soon the sound of rain echoed across the wide plaza before the western wall, striking the pale limestone ground and the ancient stones themselves. The smooth stone floor began to shine beneath the falling water. People continued moving, but more slowly now. Some stepped back toward the covered areas along the edges of the plaza. Others remained where they were, watching the rain fall harder with every passing minute. The atmosphere shifted, not into panic, but into quiet awareness. Something about the moment felt different. Water began to collect. At first, my thin streams ran across the worn stone surface, flowing gently through the slight slopes of the plaza. Then the streams widened, joining together as the rain continued. Reflections of the lights trembled on the wet ground, turning the courtyard into a shifting mirror of gold and shadow. Soon the water spread closer to the base of the western wall itself. Images captured from above showed a scene few expected to witness. The ancient stones standing firm, while water rippled across the plaza below. Worshippers moved carefully through the shallow pools, their dark coats and prayer shawls reflecting across the shining stone beneath their feet. The sight was striking. Jerusalem is often imagined through its stone. Dry walls, dusty streets, and sunlit hills stretching beyond the city gates. Yet now water flowed across the sacred plaza, transforming the familiar space into something almost unrecognizable. The contrast alone was enough to make people stop and look. Videos began spreading quickly online. Some clips showed rain pouring across the limestone floor. Others captured the reflections of the western wall shimmering in moving water. Viewers around the world replayed the footage, trying to understand what they were seeing. The mood online slowly shifted. Where the earlier swarm of insects had sparked curiosity, the storm brought something heavier, a quiet sense of concern. Not fear, but uncertainty. How unusual was this? Had the plaza ever looked like this before? Was it simply a rare storm, or another strange moment unfolding after the last? No one rushed to explain. The rain continued steadily, turning the open plaza into a landscape shaped by sound and motion. The air cooled as the rhythm of water striking stone filled the night. The ancient wall remained unchanged at the center of it all, its massive blocks darkened by rain, steady against the shifting scene around it. Some worshippers continued their prayers despite the weather, stepping carefully across the wet ground. Others paused beneath the rain, watching quietly, as if trying to remember the moment, because it felt unusual, not dramatic in a loud way, but powerful in contrast. A sacred place known for stability, now surrounded by flowing water, reflecting lights that trembled with every ripple. And as the rain finally began to ease, one thought lingered quietly among those who later watched the videos. The atmosphere had changed. Something about the sequence of events, first the swarm in the sky, then the sudden storm, made people look more closely than before. But this was only the beginning. As the rain slowly faded and the water drained away from the stone plaza, many believed the strange moments had ended. The sky above Jerusalem seemed to grow quiet again. The wet ground reflected the fading lights, and people began returning to their usual rhythm of prayer near the western wall. But the sky was not finished yet. The air felt different that day. Clouds hung low over the old city earlier than expected, spreading across the sky in thick gray layers. Wind began moving through the open plaza, stronger than usual, brushing against prayer shawls and loose clothing. The sound of it echoed softly along the ancient stones. Some people continued their prayers, but others looked upward, sensing the change before anything had actually happened. Towering above the skyline were several construction cranes from nearby restoration and building projects around Jerusalem. They had become part of the background of the city, tall metal frames standing quietly above the rooftops and stone walls. Most people barely noticed them anymore, until the wind strengthened. It arrived in sudden bursts, only sweeping across the plaza with a force that felt sharper than before. Dust lifted from nearby streets. Loose materials rattled somewhere beyond the walls. The peaceful atmosphere shifted subtly, turning tense in just a few moments. Then something changed. One of the massive cranes near the old city began to move. At first, the motion was almost imperceptible, a slight tilt that could have been mistaken for a trick of the eye against the dark clouds. But seconds later, the movement became clear. The towering metal structure leaned farther, its long arms shifting slowly against the sky. People began looking up. Some paused where they stood. Others instinctively stepped back. The sound came next, a deep metallic groan carried by the wind, echoing through the open space around the ancient walls. And then it fell. The collapse happened suddenly. The enormous crane tipped forward and crashed downward with tremendous force, Metal tore through the air before striking the ground somewhere beyond the nearby buildings. The impact produced a heavy echo that seemed to roll across the city for a brief moment. For a split second, everything felt still. Then voices rose. People began moving quickly, some running, others trying to understand what had just happened. The calm rhythm that usually defined the plaza vanished instantly. The wind continued pushing through the open space while confusion spread across the crowd. And in moments like this, some people quietly remembered words long written in scripture. The earth shakes and trembles. The foundations of the mountains quake. Psalm 18:7. The atmosphere changed completely. Some visitors stepped away from the open areas. Others tried to look toward the direction where the crane had fallen. Phones appeared as people began recording the dark sky and the distant sounds of movement beyond the walls. For a moment, the ancient city felt unexpectedly fragile. And the crane that had once stood high above the skyline now lay broken somewhere beyond view. A stark reminder of how quickly ordinary scenes can transform into something else. Emergency vehicles could soon be heard in the distance, their sounds echoing faintly through the narrow streets of Jerusalem. Videos began spreading online almost immediately. Clips showed the dark clouds over the old city, the violent movement of the crane against the sky, and the moment it disappeared from view. And people around the world replayed the footage, trying to understand how something so large could collapse so suddenly. This moment felt different from the earlier events. The insects had sparked curiosity. The rain had created concern. But this introduced something new: vulnerability. Another line of scripture quietly surfaced in the minds of some viewers watching the footage later. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. Psalm 56:3. The mood had shifted everywhere. Even as the wind continued moving through the plaza, the ancient stones of the western wall remained exactly where they had stood for centuries. Silent, unmoved, steady amid the tension around them. That contrast stayed with many witnesses. Above them, the sky remained dark. The wind whispered along the stone surfaces. Conversations became quieter as people tried to piece together what they had just seen. No one rushed to explain it. No one tried to assign meaning too quickly. It was simply real, a sudden event that transformed curiosity into something heavier. And as the city slowly settled again beneath the dark sky, one quiet thought seemed to linger in the background. If something like this could happen so suddenly, what might come next? After the chaos slowly settled, the atmosphere around the western wall felt quieter, but not entirely calm. The wind still moved gently through the open plaza, softer now, carrying the cool scent of rain and stone. And people began returning to their rhythm of prayer and quiet conversation. Some stepped closer to the ancient wall again, placing their hands against the weathered stones. Others walked slowly across the plaza. Yet something in the air felt different, as if the evening in Jerusalem had not fully finished unfolding. Then the sky changed. At first, it was only a distant flicker of light behind the clouds, a brief flash that many barely noticed. But soon another followed, brighter this time, stretching across the dark sky above the old city. Moments later came the sound. A deep roll of thunder moved across the hills surrounding Jerusalem, echoing faintly through the narrow streets and across the open plaza. Heads lifted again. Visitors and worshippers slowed their steps, their attention drawn upward as flashes of lightning began appearing between the thick clouds. The sky seemed alive, shifting from darkness to sudden brightness and back again. Thin lines of light traced across the sky, briefly illuminating the stone walls, rooftops, and ancient towers before fading again. No one rushed, no one panicked. People simply watched. Some stood still for a moment, letting the sound of thunder pass over the city. Others continued walking slowly while glancing upward, trying to understand the rhythm of the storm above them. The western wall remained steady at the center of it all, its massive stones reflecting faint flashes of light whenever the sky briefly opened. The contrast was striking. Above, movement, light, and distant thunder. Below, quiet footsteps and silent observation. Phones appeared again, but this time the recordings carried a different feeling. There was no sudden shock, no chaos, only atmosphere. Videos captured lightning flashing behind dark clouds above Jerusalem, reflections of light shimmering on the wet stone ground. in silhouettes of people looking toward the sky. For a while, the thunder grew louder, rolling across the city in slow waves. Each flash transformed the scene for a second, night briefly becoming day before darkness returned again. The air felt charged, yet strangely peaceful. Some witnesses later described the moment as surreal. Not frightening, but deeply memorable. Many said the atmosphere felt unforgettable. It was not the kind of moment that demanded explanation. It did not force meaning onto those who watched. Instead, it created a pause, a shared moment where people simply observed what was happening above them. The sky continued to flicker. Light appeared, faded, then returned again, as if the clouds themselves were breathing above the ancient city. Thunder blended with soft voices and quiet footsteps, creating a balance between stillness and movement. For those standing in the plaza, time seemed to slow. The earlier events, the swarm of insects, the sudden rain, the collapse that shook the skyline, lingered quietly in the background. Because of that, this moment felt heavier than it might have otherwise. Yet nothing dramatic followed, only the sky shifting and glowing, reminding everyone how small human movement can feel beneath something vast. Eventually, the flashes became less frequent. The thunder softened. The wind calmed. People gradually returned to their routines, though many still glanced upward now and then, as if expecting another burst of light from the clouds. The night slowly returned to normal, but something remained in the memory of those who had been there. Not fear, not certainty, just a feeling that for a brief moment the sky above Jerusalem had paused over the ancient stones, leaving behind an atmosphere that words could only partly describe. When the storm finally moved away, the sky above Jerusalem slowly returned to darkness. The plaza near the Western Wall settled back into its familiar rhythm. People resumed their prayers. Quiet conversations returned. From the outside, it seemed as though the unusual moments of the evening had passed. But online, a different story was beginning to unfold. It started with short clips. Videos appeared across social media, shared from different accounts, filmed from different corners of the old city. Some showed lightning behind the clouds. Others captured crowds turning their heads toward the same point in the sky. A few clips focused on the Western Wall itself, where brief flashes of light seemed to appear between the stones and the surrounding lamps. At first, the posts carried simple reactions: curiosity, questions, speculation. Then the tone slowly changed. Some viewers claimed they noticed something unusual in the footage. A glow, they said. A sudden brightness near the wall. The others described moments where the light seemed stronger than the surrounding lamps, appearing briefly before fading again. The videos were replayed again and again. People slowed them down, zoomed in, examined them frame by frame, and with every repost, the story grew. Personal accounts began appearing. Some said they had heard whispers in the crowd while standing in the plaza. Others claimed someone nearby had pointed toward the wall, were saying they saw a light emerging from the ancient stones themselves. Each story sounded slightly different from the last. Details shifted, but the curiosity only spread further. Soon the interpretations multiplied. Some believed the light was nothing unusual, reflections from wet stone, lightning behind clouds, or simple camera distortion. Others felt the moment carried a deeper meaning, though no one could clearly describe what had been seen. The ancient words often return when people try to describe things they cannot fully explain. For now we see through a glass, darkly. 1 Corinthians 13:12. Not as an answer, but as a reminder that human perception is often incomplete. More videos continued to appear. One showed the Western Wall surrounded by darkness, while a faint glow flickered nearby. Another captured dozens of people turning their heads at the same moment, though the reason for their attention remained unclear. Each new clip added another layer to the mystery, but none proved anything. Meanwhile, beyond the old city, another reality continued to unfold. The government of Israel remained deeply occupied with conflicts beyond its borders. Military operations, rising tensions, threats from outside. The attention of leaders and armies was focused outward, toward battles in distant regions. Yet for many watching the events in Jerusalem, another question quietly surfaced. If the nation is busy fighting wars outside, Who is responsible for the struggle within? Because not every battle happens on a battlefield. Some unfold in the human heart. Some appear in the silence of a city after strange events pass through it. Moments that cause people to pause and reflect. Moments when the sky darkens, the wind shifts, and the familiar suddenly feels uncertain. In those moments, responsibility cannot always come from governments or armies. Sometimes it belongs to individuals. Another line of scripture began appearing in discussions among viewers, trying to make sense of everything they had seen. Test everything, hold fast what is good. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Not a command to believe every story, but an invitation to look carefully, both outward and inward. Because throughout history, times of disruption have often been described as times of cleansing. Moments when societies face pressure from the outside while individuals are quietly confronted with questions inside themselves. Questions about faith, direction, responsibility. No government can complete that process. No army can enforce it. It is something each person must face personally. The videos continued circulating online. Some people watched with fascination. Others dismissed the entire story as coincidence. Many simply wondered what they had witnessed. And somewhere between what was recorded and what was believed, a deeper conversation slowly began to form. Perhaps the events themselves were not the message. Perhaps the message was the pause they created. A pause long enough for people to ask themselves a different kind of question. If the world is busy fighting battles outside, who will take responsibility for the battles within? Because in times of cleansing, history often suggests the same quiet lesson. Sometimes the first step toward changing the world is learning how to examine and redeem oneself. And as the story continued to spread, one question remained: what do you think really happened? If you're curious to explore more, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for the next part, and share your thoughts in the comments below.
Jerusalem has always been pivotal, but what just happened today? History has no answers. Above Temple Mount, light appeared where it made no sense, rising steadily upward rather than falling from the heavens, as if something had been switched on and could not be turned off. Hours later, the ground separated cleanly, layer from layer, opening only where ancient boundaries had already been drawn. Then, a deep, rhythmic sound emerged from beneath, causing the city to fall unnaturally still. And just before dawn, the oldest stones revealed the most unsettling change. From thin seams in a few ancient blocks, a dark red liquid slowly emerged, then quickly dried and remained unchanged, as if nothing had happened. Before we continue, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we examine what these events may be pointing toward. Across Jerusalem, the first change did not arrive quietly. It appeared as light faint at first, forming low over the city, where darkness should have remained undisturbed. It did not descend from the sky. It rose slowly, as if released from within the air itself, climbing upward in a steady column before thinning and fading. There was no flash, no heat, no shadow cast on the ground below. It looked less like illumination and more like something being allowed to leave. Authorities searched for explanations: atmospheric distortion, reflections, aircraft, but none accounted for what witnesses recorded. The light had no visible source, no arc, no drift. It appeared, held, and withdrew within minutes. Whatever triggered, it did not linger. At the same moment, the city reacted in quieter ways. Prayers paused mid-sentence. Conversations trailed off. In several parts of Jerusalem, people later said they felt an unprompted urge to look upward without knowing why. Calls to prayer and early morning bells felt delayed, as if the city itself hesitated. Nothing commanded attention, yet attention was taken. What unsettled observers most was not the light itself, but its direction. Light does not normally rise away from the earth, and yet this did, calm, controlled, deliberate. Jerusalem, the crossroads of faith for billions, became the center of global attention minutes ago. What happened has already drawn prayers from every continent. Religious leaders are speaking. Social media is overflowing. And one word keeps appearing again and again: sign. But before assumptions spread, we need to understand what actually happened. Stay with us. Give us a like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Jerusalem was not expecting disaster today. The afternoon had unfolded quietly. Pilgrims moved slowly through the narrow limestone streets of the old city. Vendors spoke in low voices beneath stone archways. Sunlight rested gently across ancient walls that have absorbed centuries of prayer, war, and waiting. Nothing in the sky suggested disruption. Nothing in the air hinted at danger. Then the ground shifted. It was not violent. There was no dramatic tearing of earth, no towering wave of dust racing across rooftops. Instead, it felt like a brief hesitation beneath the city, as if the stone itself had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. People stopped mid-step. Conversations broke off without explanation. A vibration passed through the pavement, subtle but unmistakable. Within seconds, windows rattled. In the open prayer areas near the sacred quarters, worshippers instinctively looked upward, not downward. The sky remained clear. No thunder. No aircraft overhead. Yet the tremor moved horizontally, rippling through the limestone foundations that support some of the oldest structures in the world. Then came the wind. Without warning, a sharp gust pushed through the narrow corridors of the old city, accelerating between stone walls, like air forced through a canyon. Dust lifted suddenly from the ground. Loose sand spiraled upward in tight columns, stinging eyes and blurring vision. It lasted less than a minute, but long enough to turn calm into confusion. Emergency alerts did not activate immediately. Seismic monitors outside the city registered movement, but early readings were inconsistent. Some sensors detected a shallow disturbance. Others showed almost nothing at all. Social media filled faster than official data could respond. Videos appeared, short clips, capturing trembling lamps, swaying prayer books, startled crowds, gripping ancient stone for balance. Witnesses began using the same phrase. It didn't feel like an earthquake. For a city built upon layers of history, the integrity of the ground is not an abstract concern. Jerusalem's foundations are complex. Beneath visible streets lie tunnels, caverns, and archaeological layers stretching back thousands of years. A shallow shift, even a minor one, can travel unpredictably through these hidden spaces. What unsettled many was the location. The tremor appeared concentrated in the very heart of the city, where faith, history, and tension overlap within a few hundred meters. It was not a regional quake affecting surrounding suburbs equally. Reports from neighborhoods farther west described little to nothing, yet, in the old city, the sensation was clear enough to stop movement entirely. Emergency crews began scanning for structural stress fractures. Authorities asked crowds to move cautiously. Clergy and religious leaders urged calm, even as they themselves searched the faces of those around them for understanding. The atmosphere shifted from confusion to vigilance. Because in Jerusalem, even a small disturbance carries weight. And that is what made it heavier. Within minutes, international news outlets began running alerts. Unusual tremor in Jerusalem. Sacred sites report ground movement. Religious communities across continents began sharing footage, asking for updates, offering prayers before full details were known. And the world was only beginning to understand that this was not the end of the event. It was the beginning. The tremor had barely faded when the first crack appeared. It was thin at first, almost invisible against the pale limestone. A faint line running diagonally across a section of ancient wall near the prayer plaza of the western wall. For a few seconds, no one noticed. The crowd was still unsettled from the ground movement. Some were checking phones, others were whispering prayers under their breath. Then the stone shifted. A low grinding sound, deep, heavy, unmistakable, rose from within the wall itself. Not a surface crumble, not a pebble falling. This was internal movement, the kind that suggests weight redistributing after centuries of stillness. People stepped back instinctively. One block, massive, weathered, layered with generations of touch, tilted forward by mere centimeters. That was enough. Smaller stones beneath it dislodged first, striking the ground with sharp cracks that echoed across the plaza. The sound ricocheted off surrounding structures, amplifying the moment beyond its size. Then, the larger section gave way. It was not a total collapse. The wall still stood, but a portion ancient, foundational broke free and fell. Dust erupted upward, swallowing the lower prayer area in a gray cloud. Screams replaced silence. Prayer shawls scattered. People stumbled backward, some falling to their knees, not in devotion, but in shock. Cameras never stopped recording. Live streams captured the exact second stone met Earth. Viewers across continents watched ancient rock, believed by many to have survived empires' fracture before their eyes. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. This was not an apartment complex, not a modern tower. It was one of the most spiritually charged locations in the world. Structural engineers arriving on scene quickly assessed the damage. Preliminary observations suggested the tremor had destabilized already stressed segments. Jerusalem's limestone, though resilient, weakens over centuries through erosion, moisture shifts, and microfractures invisible to the naked eye. A subtle ground shift can magnify pressure points that have existed quietly for decades. But again, the timing unsettled observers. The collapse occurred minutes after a tremor that many sensors barely registered. The affected section was not previously flagged as critical, and the failure appeared concentrated in one symbolic zone within meters of thousands gathered in prayer. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some claimed they heard a second vibration just before the fall. Others insisted there was a flash of light reflected off the stone. Authorities urged restraint, emphasizing structural stress as the likely cause. Experts spoke of load-bearing calculations, sediment shifts, and historical wear. Yet the emotional weight was undeniable. The Western Wall is more than masonry. It is memory embedded in rock. It is the last visible remnant of the Second Temple complex, an anchor point for Jewish identity across centuries of exile and return. Pilgrims press written prayers into its crevices. Tears have soaked its surface. Generations have faced it in hope. To see part of it fall, however limited, the damage felt larger than physics. Nearby, along the eastern ridge, observers on the slopes of the Mount of Olives reported small surface fractures appearing in the ground. Hairline splits in pathways that had not existed earlier in the day. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to deepen unease. Engineers began scanning for additional instability beneath the broader sacred plateau, including areas approaching the Temple Mount. Officials were careful with language. They spoke of localized structural compromise. They avoided speculation. But the footage told its own story. Ancient stone had moved. Sacred architecture had yielded. And it had happened within minutes of a tremor that barely announced itself. As rescue teams worked and dust slowly settled over the plaza, one realization grew heavier. This was no longer just a natural disturbance. The ground had shifted, and history had felt it. If the tremor unsettled the city, and the collapse shook its heart, what happened next unsettled something deeper. Because several recordings captured something that did not fit neatly into either explanation. Minutes before the stone section gave way near the western wall, a faint vertical glow appeared in the background of at least 3 separate videos. It lasted no more than 4 seconds. Thin, pale, almost like a column of mist reflecting sunlight, but the sky at that moment was clear, and the angle of light did not align with reflection. Most viewers missed it the first time. Only after the footage was replayed slowed frame by frame did people begin pointing to it. The glow seemed to rise briefly from behind the upper stones, then vanish just before the first grinding sound was heard. Officials have not confirmed it. Some analysts suggest it could have been dust catching direct light during the tremor. Others propose lens distortion or compression artifacts from mobile devices. These explanations are plausible. They are consistent with physics. But the timing remains difficult to ignore. At nearly the same moment, audio sensors positioned beneath sections of the old city registered a low-frequency vibration too deep for human hearing, but detectable on specialized equipment used for structural monitoring. It did not match the seismic signature of the earlier tremor. It was shorter, concentrated, almost like a pulse. No explosion was detected. No machinery was operating below ground. Yet the waveform exists. In addition, several witnesses in the plaza described what they called a pause before the collapse. Not silence in the normal sense, but a sudden dampening of ambient sound. Birds that had been circling above disappeared from view seconds before the stones fell. Conversations seemed to flatten, as if air pressure had subtly shifted. There is no verified atmospheric anomaly recorded at that exact minute. Still, multiple testimonies share similar wording. It felt like something held its breath. Even more unusual were reports from a monitoring station near the Temple Mount. One sensor briefly lost signal during the tremor, not due to power failure, but due to an unexplained data interruption lasting precisely 2.8 seconds. Engineers are investigating whether it was a technical glitch or electromagnetic interference. 8. So far, no definitive cause has been announced. Experts caution against overinterpretation. In high-stress environments, perception sharpens but also distorts. When symbolic locations are involved, the human mind instinctively searches for pattern and meaning. Dust becomes light. Sound becomes omen. And yet, when separate anomalies converge, visual irregularity, unexplained acoustic pulse, sensor disruption questions naturally follow. Individually, each detail may have a rational explanation. Together, they form a sequence. Tremor, glow, pulse, collapse. Some religious commentators have already drawn connections to ancient texts describing light, shaking ground, and shifting stone in moments of divine intervention. Others insist such interpretations risk overshadowing the real human impact, the injuries, the fear, the fragility of infrastructure. Both responses are unfolding simultaneously. Scientists are analyzing footage. Clergy are calling for prayer. Social media is splitting between skepticism and reverence. What is undeniable is this: the collapse did not feel random to those who stood there. Whether that perception reflects physical causation or emotional gravity remains under investigation. But in Jerusalem, a city where stone and symbolism are inseparable, even small irregularities carry amplified meaning. And tonight, as rescue lights illuminate fractured rock and dust settles over sacred ground, the unanswered details continue to circulate. Was it coincidence? Was it convergence? Or was it simply the kind of rare alignment of natural forces and human perception that history later remembers as something larger than it first appeared? The investigation has only begun, and the world is still watching. Within 10 minutes of the collapse, Jerusalem was no longer the only city holding its breath. News alerts moved faster than official briefings. Live stream clips from the plaza near the Western Wall were shared across continents before emergency statements were fully drafted. Dust rising against ancient stone became the image of the hour. Commentators began speaking over shaky footage, trying to interpret what viewers had just witnessed. And almost immediately, the tone shifted from curiosity to prayer. In Rome, candles were lit beneath the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. In New York, interfaith leaders gathered in Lower Manhattan for an unscheduled vigil. In small congregations across Asia and South America, pastors paused mid-sermon to acknowledge the event unfolding in Jerusalem. The phrase, "Pray for Jerusalem," began trending globally. Governments issued statements of concern. Archaeological authorities called for calm and emphasized the importance of preserving historical integrity. Religious leaders, however, spoke differently. Some framed the moment as a reminder of fragility of stone, of certainty, of human control. Others used a stronger word: warning. International media outlets replayed the sequence again and again. First the tremor reports, then the slow-motion collapse, then the frame-by-frame analysis of the faint vertical glow, captured seconds before impact. Panels of experts debated geological plausibility, while theologians referenced centuries of expectation tied to the city's sacred geography. The location mattered. Jerusalem is not simply a capital or a tourist destination. It is a focal point of layered belief, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, compressed into a few square kilometers. When something shifts here, it does not remain local. It becomes symbolic by default. Crowds began gathering outside embassies. Prayer chains formed online. Live stream platforms saw millions join simultaneous moments of silence. In some places, church bells rang without coordination, spontaneous, not scheduled. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, floodlights illuminated the damaged section of the wall. Engineers worked carefully, documenting fractures and stabilizing adjacent stones. Medical teams continued assessing minor injuries. The practical response was focused, technical, grounded. But beyond the physical damage, something intangible was spreading. The convergence of three elements: a tremor with inconsistent readings, a sacred structure partially collapsing, and unexplained anomalies captured on camera, created a narrative larger than the sum of its parts.